Which of these sounds more engaging to you? You see it off in the distance. It's curled over slain prey, blood dripping from its mouth, long black claws accompanied by a long black nose. Shining ebony horns protrude from its head. It lets out a hacking cough before it twists and contorts its body, turning towards your group. Its fangs, rotten, caked with blood, the reek of death permeating from the creature. It lets out a shriek, alerting the others nearby. They begin to move in, swaying, drawing their large, crooked knives as they come upon your group. Or you come upon a group of goblins in the field eating their last hunt. They spot you and begin to draw their weapons. Now that might be a little overdramatic, but I think we both know which one was more engaging and which was a little boring. There are a number of common issues that dungeon masters make that leave your players wishing that the combat would just end. Combat can be stale and repetitive, or you fight the same enemies over and over. Sometimes it's just, am I fighting Bandit 6 or Bandit 7? And that's just not very fun. This is a fantasy role-playing game, and we are supposed to engage in it in a way that activates our imagination and makes us feel like we're in a different place. That's the beauty of these types of games. So today I'm going to teach you dungeon masters exactly what you can do to prevent your combat encounters from being boring. Hello role-playing gang, my name is Zach, and I've been a dungeon master for about 15 years now. Feels kind of weird to say, but I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons for a long time. I've run many games, especially homebrew games, and something that I like to do is examine other role-playing games and pull pieces of information from them to try to smush together into some conglomeration to make the best of all worlds for my players to enjoy. So the biggest issue that I see most novice dungeon masters doing is that combat tends to feel stale if you're just hitting the enemy over and over and that's your whole turn. I know, especially in the lower levels, especially with certain martial classes, you feel like you don't have a lot of options. It's my turn, whack. But there are ways that you can make combat more engaging than just dealing with the monsters or the enemies that are present in front of you at that moment. One thing that I like to do, and something that I picked up on recently from the Fate role-playing series, is to add some hazards in the scene. And Fate handles this excellently because the hazards are kind of baked in where players can create hazards that the enemies have to overcome, and enemies can create hazards that the players have to overcome. Some things give bonuses or minuses. There's a lot of different ways that you can play with hazards in your games. One of the things that I've done in the past is, say, like a city chase scene. So not only are you firing at the enemy, but you're also making acrobatics checks to leap and vault over top of stands, or you're doing athletics checks to shove through the crowd, or maybe a certain member of your party wants to use a spell to act as a type of crowd control. They've gone out of your sight. Their armor is always going up and down based on whether they have half cover or full cover, and it keeps the game very engaging if that's something that you can pull off and do it in a way that your players actually respect and appreciate. One really cool example that comes to mind of an environmental hazard is when I think of the Battle of Hogwarts in the Room of Requirement. You have Harry and the gang against Draco and his lackeys, and they're in the Room of Requirement. They cast a big, crazy, fiery spell that begins chasing them. So what we have is this fiery serpent that's crawling through the room. All kinds of goods are collapsing on top of them. They're flying all over the place. People are trying to ride out on their brooms. It's very intense, very dynamic, and it's still a combat encounter. It's still two people that are opposed to one another, engaging in fighting, but now they are both running for their lives. And in that scenario, interestingly, it's not even so much about defeating or slaying the Bandit King who you've been chasing this whole time. It's about whoever gets out of the building is going to live. And if the Bandit King is still in there at the end of this long encounter, then he's going down. Something that I've started doing recently is actually pulling from everyone's least favorite version of D&D, 4th edition. They have this neat mechanic in there where certain enemies will have minions Now, minions are one hit by design. Their hit points are inconsequential. They may have, I don't know, 3 hit points, 5 hit points. But the point is to have a big bad guy, a central focus point, and then a bunch of little guys sprinkled in. The little guys will continue to do like 1d6 damage every single turn with their short swords or something like that. Or maybe just by being there, they offer flanking to the boss, or they have pack tactics or something in those terms. But these little tiny guys are very easy for your party to wipe out, and that's important for a couple of reasons. One, it makes it where your enemy, your big bad guy, kind of has temporary hit points. Every attack that's going on something else is not going on him, and it makes your enemies seem a little bit stronger, even though they're really not. Two, it makes your players feel strong. When you're playing in a D&D game, it can be kind of demoralizing if every single enemy you fight, it's, I hit it, it's, yeah, you heard it. I hit it, yep, okay, it's bleeding a little bit. I hit it, yeah, almost dead, you almost got it. You know, if you just keep smacking and smacking, you're supposed to be epic heroes. So having these little minions where you can take one swing of the blade and knock down 2 or 3 of them or something like that really feels empowering, and it especially makes your spellcasters very happy. Anyone who has an area of effect ability, it will make them very happy. Let's not forget, some enemies have abilities that can change the battlefield. One of my players' favorite encounters was against an ice dragon. It used abilities like a wall of frost and roots, like icy roots around their feet, to control the battlefield, and it changed from being just a smack, 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 you know, that kind of thing, to, okay, now it's up in the air, now we need to move in, oh, it's come down, it put a wall of frost between this group and this group, now those people have to go around, and they're going to be out of combat for 2 turns, and these people are frozen, but if you're frozen there, then you're going to be inside of this debuff, and if you can have those kind of encounters where there are crowd control, debuff zones, enemies that can move or maybe can't be reached by certain players, making things dynamic is what they're going to remember. It went from just a regular game of D&D to almost like a World of Warcraft raid boss, and a lot of my players really like that. If you're enjoying this video so far, consider liking and subscribing. It's completely free and you can always change your mind later. And, you know, it really helps me as a new content creator know what you're looking for if I can see that subscribers are coming in on certain videos. So, like and subscribe, on to the rest of the video. Now, another issue that I see pretty often is enemies without motivation or without personality, just cookie cutter enemies, let's say. If your players aren't engaged in a story, then your entire game becomes just about the crunchy numbers part of it. And some players are into that. Some players are really into just getting the biggest number possible, and that's perfectly fine if you want to play that way, but there are probably war games that are better suited for strictly combat. Now, my recommendation is that you give a little bit of personality to every one of these groups that you're fighting. It doesn't always have to be that the enemies you're up against have a vested interest against the party. It doesn't always have to be some big rival from 3 sessions ago who has it out for you and chases your party across the countryside. But what I would do is try to make your encounters seem a little more memorable by giving each little enemy a little bit of flair. And what I mean by this is simply talking through your NPCs can be the easiest way to do that. Now for me, what I like to do is have the NPCs maybe jeer at the party, say some insults, or maybe and spit in their direction, something like that, as the combat goes, to keep them engaged. Now imagine this scenario. The bandit draws his blade. He sways with each step, reeking of stale beer as he swings his scimitar wildly at you. He murmurs a curse and spits in your direction. Now, if I were playing the drunk who's swinging madly and spitting at me, that's the guy who I want to go after. That guy's got to go down. Maybe you have one minion who really likes to amp up the boss. Like, yeah, nobody's stronger than the boss. Nobody can take down the boss. Get him, boss. They're going to hate that guy. They're going to go after this hype man way more than they're going to go after the actual boss just because he's so annoying. And that's something that they're going to remember, whether they like the guy or not. They're going to remember it. And that's really what it's about, is creating something memorable. Now, another thing that I like to do is to put a new coat of paint on enemies. So ever since I started playing forever ago, I've almost never used stock monsters from the Dungeon Master's Guide or the Monster's Manual or any supplementary books. I tend to find what I like. I tend to find certain stat blocks that are appropriate for the player's level, that are a good challenge, and then I just make it into whatever I want it to be. Adding a new coat of paint to some of the more familiar monsters and enemies that your party has already seen can be very refreshing and also keep your players on their toes. If a seasoned player goes into an encounter against a troll, they may be inclined to say like, okay, we need to use fire to keep it from regenerating and blah blah blah. Metagaming isn't always intentional, and it's not always bad. But if that's something that you're concerned with, this can help with that too. You describe to them a shambling mass of horrors with multiple arms twisted in contorted configurations, crawling through the forest floor, long dark hair covering its face with a single bright yellow eye in the center. And what they're going to say is, oh, I don't know what this is, but we need to get ready for whatever it is. It sounds malicious. It sounds terrifying. Everybody get your weapons out. We're going to have to attack. You can give this thing the same stat block as a troll. It can regenerate. It has weakness to fire. Exact same stats from top to bottom. But now what you've described is something entirely alien that will keep the party guessing at how to deal with it. Something else that can make combat just as interesting is to have them roll to see if they flee when the odds turn against them. You know, I feel like it's important for players to know that it doesn't always have to be a battle to the death. So having your enemies show that first is kind of a good way to get the idea across, and it makes your players feel more powerful. You can have a morale check, let's call it. When over half of the enemies go down, have the leader of the group give a wisdom check, and if they surpass a certain DC, then they will stay. If they fail, then they run away. And honestly, it makes perfect sense. If you have a group of little goblins running around and their big hobgoblin leader gets his head cut off in one turn, morale is going to fall dramatically, and they're probably going to scatter into the forest in a realistic situation. Not every tiny little greedy creature is willing to put their life on the line just for the sake of doing it. And that actually leads me into my final point, which is that oftentimes whenever people play these games, there are just no real stakes for the players. Now, of course, we don't want to, as much as people think otherwise, a good DM doesn't want to kill their players. You want to challenge your players. And sometimes finding the balance between what's going to challenge them and what's going to kill them it is a balancing act. It really can be. So there are other ways that you can achieve consequences or stakes without risking your players' lives. If a player feels like the outcome of combat doesn't really matter, then they're not going to be engaged. If they feel like they're invincible, then they kind of already are, unless you're ready to kill one of your players to prove a point. Now, one way that you can create consequences is through their stuff, and that's something that I've had great success in the past. People are resting at night, have a couple players make some checks. Failed your perception check? Okay, and then some of their things go missing. A bandit grabs their stuff in the night. Now, this is especially useful if they're not one of those groups that's overly cautious and sets up spells and wards every night to protect themselves. Alternately, you could have it where when players enter a certain city or town, they have to put their weapons away or give them to an individual to hold as part of the policy of the town. Now you're in a situation where whatever you do is immediately much more risky. D&D encounters are not always about loot. Sometimes it's about loss. What do I mean by this? Well, you can create a scenario where the players are on a timer. Let's say you have 20 turns to defeat some enemies before their lackeys take the princess that they've kidnapped and move her to another location. Now there are stakes. Going back to that first scenario that I posed where you're in a city and you're chasing after someone, maybe you're chasing them because they have your items or you're a certain magic item of yours. They pilfered something from your bag and they ran off. Now the risk isn't only like, oh, we have to chase this guy, we have to get through the city, we have to make sure the guards don't get in our way, but we also cannot let him get away, because if he gets away, we are losing one of our most treasured items, and that is a lot scarier than just dealing with someone going down and getting picked back up again. A recent game that I've been checking out that does a great job at creating consequences is Shadow Dark. In this game, no one has dark vision, and players use torches to see in the dark. Now those torches are on a 1-hour timer in real life. You have an actual timer that you turn on, and if your players want to spend 10 minutes searching the area and whatever, that's fine. You take 10 minutes off of the timer. But also, if the players want to just sit there and chat around the table, like, oh, should we do this, should we do that, oh, my turn, and do all the, metagaming things that you tend to have with players, what's going to happen is that timer is going to keep going down while they're just chatting away. The reason that this is really effective in Shadow Dark is because inventory space is so tightly managed. In your entire party, you're probably only going to have a couple of torches at any given time, and when the lights go out, things get bad. Because in this world, when the lights go out, there are going to be lots and lots and lots of more monsters coming upon your group. So there's an inherent risk. We have to keep the flame alive, because if the flame goes out, this encounter is going to get much, much harder. Likewise, you could do something similar in your games. I remember I had a game where the players were fighting swarms of enemies and trying to prevent the resurrection of an ancient necromancer. In this encounter, my players are fighting swarms of undead, and these are minion enemies, so I describe it for every one they kill. For every single roll of the die, it's more like they're shattering 2 or 3 skeletons, but they are trying to get up this hill to this great cauldron where this character is to be resurrected. Now, if they can't get to the cauldron and stop this ritual in time, it's going to be very, very bad. Now, my players were not able to stop the resurrection of the necromancer in time, but I didn't just outright kill them for their actions. The necromancer came back to life and immediately began channeling a large fireball towards the players. One of our party members said that he wanted to throw himself in front of it and sacrifice himself, try to save the group. And yeah, he took a fireball point blank to the face, dropped completely, and was horrifically scarred, burned from head to toe for the rest of the encounter. They had to peel plates of metal that had seared to his flesh. But he carried those scars with his character, and he remembered the consequences of failing the timer. He got to live, but it dramatically changed the way that he played his character. He was forever scarred, and also kind of afraid of fire, but more importantly, he had a death wish to take down this necromancer. Another way that you can create consequences in your games is to have an enemy summoner. Every couple of turns that you don't kill this person, you're getting another enemy churned into the battlefield. And put that person way in the back and have people protecting them and all that. So there's actually a risk. If we don't take this guy out, we're going to get outnumbered. Another simple solution is to have enemies use a slow-acting poison. Maybe not one that kills, but it's like, okay, you failed your save. You have 10 turns before you are paralyzed. That's a risk. If your whole party falls, then you're being kidnapped, you're being taken to their lair, you're being put in chains, and your items are being taken away from you. So there's other ways to add risk. One great way that I've seen and used to up the stakes is to threaten your player's home base. If your players have a base of operations, somewhere that they all like to go and hang out and keep their stuff and maybe their family members, that is a place that's going to be very important to them. And threatening that That's a risk. So if you add a little bit of variety to your enemies, give them some personality, and then create some stakes, you've already made an encounter that's 10 times better than what most Dungeon Masters will do. If you like this video, subscribe and stay tuned for more next week. This has been Zach with the Role Playing Gang, and may the dice be ever in your favor.